Gaza War day 293. No end in sight. Probably don't have to get into much detail on President of America Netanyahu's speech to the American Congress, which was locked down tight. You remember the Speaker of the House told people not to, told politicians, American politicians, not to protest lest they be arrested. People were arrested in the Capitol protesting. There were pepper spraying protesters at the Capitol protesting Netanyahu's speech. So, um, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. The politicians in charge of genocide would be expected not to stop genocide just on account of a popular protest in the Capitol. The way that they groveled, kneeled, bent the knee before Netanyahu was undignified. But what did you expect? They've been funding, arming the genocide for 10 months. Were they not going to applaud for it 58 times in a 60-minute speech? Of course they were going to applaud for it. So there's nothing surprising or interesting in any of this. Um, I do assume that people listening to this video, people who come to this channel, know not to expect Kamala Harris to be any different from Joe Biden. She is the definition of a party animal. She lined up every time they were asked to line up. She said she invoked Israel's right to self-defense. She evoked the anti-Semitism smear whenever it was called for. So she's not going to do anything different from Biden. She's a genocidal pro-Israel person like Biden. I don't probably need to tell any of you that. What I do hate to see on here, over here in our little anti-genocide corner of the internet from American friends is I hate to see your third party defeatism. I hate to see your only there's only two choices this fall or whatever. Why? The Jill Stein got herself duly on the ballot. Apparently, she can get legally 270 electoral votes at least. So just, you know, don't throw your ballot away. Don't vote for a genocidal party. Why do that? And don't tell other people that it's throwing their ballot away if they don't want to vote for either one of those. If they want to vote for Stein or West or whatever, I don't know. Probably Stein. If I were an electoral strategist, which I'm not, um, but if I were, I would say everybody who's not anti-genocide should throw their weight behind Stein and tell everybody you know to vote for Stein in every state where they can. That's what elections, remember the theory of elections? The theory of elections is the politicians propose a plan, the voters, if they like it, vote for that plan, vote for that politician. That's the theory. It's not a theory of no matter how many people are running, there's only two because other people are either going to vote for one or the other, and therefore you have to vote for one or the other. And then you have to have this game it out, and all the assumptions in the game always favor the parties that are in favor of genocide. Don't play this game. Follow the democratic theory. Vote who you want. I'm not going to say that much more about this because, like I said, well, you know, you guys get plenty of American electoral politics. You don't come to this channel by someone who's not even American to hear my takes on the American elections. But let me just say this. There have been many, 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 many elections all over the world where the assumption was that one of the major parties was going to win. And then there was an upset and another party won. It happened recently in France, but the Bolivarian Revolution started with an upset victory by an upstart electoral force that wasn't supposed to win. There are so many cases like this. So, you know, maybe America's just exceptional in this way too. Guns, private healthcare, um, school shootings. Maybe only there's only ever gonna ever be two parties too. Maybe that's just how America is gonna be. But you know, where you can vote, where there's an electoral system, I don't know. I don't think you have to be so defeatist. So anyway, that's all I'll say about it. Um, let's get to the war, which is why you came. Gaza. So remember the last sit rep, John Elmer was here, and we mentioned how Israel is going all around and redoing the whole war. So they're redoing the Khan Younis invasion, which means they're retaking the Khan Younis casualties. There are new videos from the resistance of them destroying tanks with the Yasin 105s. There's reports Rafah fighting continues. The corridors continue to be mortared, the Netzarim corridor and the Philadelphia corridor. The Rafah fighting, Rafah field report is that they lured two separate Israeli forces into tunnels and destroyed the entire Israeli force that they lured into tunnels. Speaking of tunnels, speaking of tunnels, you may have seen Haaretz did a report on the so-called something they called the Atlantis system. Did you even know that it was called that? I, you know probably that I've been following this war rather closely. I didn't know that it was called the Atlantis system, but Haaretz did a special investigation, and the investigation goes like this. This is how the Atlantis project failed to flood the Hamas tunnels in the Gaza Strip. It's by Ethan Avriel and Yaniv Kobowitz. It started with the adoption, the subtitle reads, of an old and inappropriate plan, continued with ignoring the professionals and possible danger to the abductees, and ended a few months later without any knowledge if anyone was hurt at all. Haaretz draws a profile of the Atlantis project, which was a foregone military failure, which no one stopped until it was too late. So you remember also that in our last sit rep with John, I was talking about the guy, the Blackwater guy, and how he said he had a feasible plan to flood the tunnels, but they didn't take it. Well, this is the feasible plan to flood the tunnels, and you can see that Haaretz, having followed it up, did not find that it was um, uh, effective after all. So, so just to read this a little bit together, I've got it in front of me. Let me see what I can pull out for you. Um, the forces didn't really think. General Finkelman said there was frustration at they have an inside source. They don't say it's a security source. And the source quoted says there was frustration because at these stages, the forces didn't really think we would start entering all the tunnels. They also began to understand the order of magnitude of the tunnels. They were still in the process of learning about the tunnels they had encountered in their large extent. So for a month and a half, they put soldiers into plumber work and pipeline security for a project that he had no idea if it had operational facility. A commander who took part in the establishment of the system said. So, so pumps and pipes all over the Gaza Strip. It was a contingency plan that they had on the shelf for years, apparently, years before October 7th. And they just took it and ran with it, received the approvals, and they set off to civilian experts, one given for a responsibility for the study of flow of water inside the tunnels, and then required to research on water loss through the tunnel walls. So then the IDF was neutral. They turned the 13th Fleet into a piping unit, they called it. Okay, let me keep going here. Translating the Hebrew as I go, so apologies for that. Piping unit. The main goal, connecting pipes and deploying them in the combat area. They had no ability to know if the system was working, what happened inside the tunnels, what the condition of the terrorists inside, and if there were any hostages who were injured as a result of the water. Until this moment, it is not clear what damage was caused in the tunnels. We simply do not know anything. So, Water Authority, I gather they maybe tortured a Hamas person as part of the independent study. The Water Authority researchers were exposed to the questioning of a Hamas operative. So they're saying they had somebody that they interrogated, and he told them the shafts are built in the form of steps or a small ladder of 1 or 2 meters, and from there are steps or a slope that leads into the tunnel to make it easier for diggers. It will be difficult for soldiers to enter with a lot of equipment for them. The distance between shafts can lie. The tunnel can be short. Hitting narrow shafts will bring only limited achievements. Passages between tunnels have no exit shafts. Let's keep going. This is it's basically a story of how little they know. The hydrological service was furious. Um, the discharge was not carried out according to developed theory. No findings were collected and defined measurements were not made. There was the experts they had no idea whether it was successful or not. They had no idea about abductees. The IDF was not related to the forces encountered in the field. The IDF thought it was possible to reinvent the wheel without studying the impacting. This is all pretty vague. I see my questions from when I heard about this tunnel flooding thing were always hydrological. I just thought this is hydrologically fairly unprecedented, trying to flood an underground network of tunnels. Uh, okay, how's it possible? There was someone who wondered how Hamas overcomes the rainwater in the tunnels all these years, how it is possible that the tunnels were not flooded. Here we go. This is the kind of thing I was interested in. It turns out that they built the tunnels on levels, on slopes, with septic tanks for rainwater and side doors. They have solutions for diverting water to absorption points. Therefore, it'll be very difficult to impossible to flood the tunnels and cause a pressure and water level where it will be difficult to be in them. When Sisi became president of Egypt, they flooded the tunnels with sewage water, but that was dealt with by Hamas, and it's nobody's business. It was not a situation of talking logically. The perception of the command was that if the terrorists die in the tunnels, then great. If they get out, the forces will kill them in incidents. In practice, it didn't happen, and it didn't happen. So this is their dream, right? That they could just um like boarding a house up and setting it on fire with the inhabitants inside and then killing them as they come out, like a standard kind of massacre that you may have seen in a certain part of Eastern Europe in some decades ago, the 1940s or so. That kind of massacre is probably what they had hoped to do in the tunnels. For weeks, there were parallel worlds, the article continues. In one, the experts are continuing their research, and the other, the IDF is already implementing the conclusions that were not there. The implementation included the purchase of special pumping systems foreign to the IDF, but there was only one small experiment before putting it into action. It was difficult to operate. It required a lot of forces and resources. The command's perception was that if, yes, the tunnel, yeah, they were hoping to kill them all with flooding or kill them as they came out. But that One weird trick. It's always that search for one weird trick. So hard to find one weird trick. Let me continue to get the translation here. Should be able to get all the rest. In this last batch. Okay. The senior officer, the command understood the system would become a white elephant. From what I understand between the lines, their source said the intention was to make the terrorists afraid and leave. Did not result the way they wanted. They tried to keep it under wraps for a while. They were afraid the abductee families would get upset about flooding the tunnels. I wonder why. Biden also apparently was afraid for the abductees. That's good. That's touching. They were afraid of the abductees dying, being flooded to death, being drowned alive. Okay, the tunnel shaft, many sinkholes, a tunnel shaft in Gaza. Okay, during the execution, it was reported that many sinkholes were created near the shafts where the discharge was carried out. 12 hours later, that they had killed. This is when they remember when they killed three of their own hostages. They shot them while they were trying to surrender. And so they're linking this article. The Haaretz article is linking the fate of those prisoners and the political fallout from murdering the Israelis murdering their own prisoners with the fate of the Atlantis system, because it was the fear of concern that the Israelis weren't our army was not handling the abductee issue properly. So yeah, again, drowning them alive may have been made a little less popular after shooting three of them while they were trying to surrender. Um, okay, some other vague things. Since these are so the experts listed, despite all this, the experts listed some operational insights in the document. Since these are long tunnels, in order to get maximum effect, it is better to coordinate the flooding activity with the bombing activity. This is because the bomb before flooding can change the route of the area and cause water loss. Also, the destruction effect is much more significant in an environment of saturated soil. In conclusion, they wrote, the way the work is carried out and the lack of indicators does not allow an understanding of the principal efficiency of the method and the limits decision making on the matter. In the meantime, the IDF nevertheless made a decision and stopped using Atlantis. It is doubtful the army will ever know what benefit it produced, if any, or what damage it caused, and to whom. Haaretz contacted the IDF spokesperson for his response, but it has not yet been provided. And so that's the rise and fall of the Atlantis system, according to Haaretz, which is, yeah, pretty shameful. Pretty shameful episode and a shameful set of episodes. Okay, let's go on. In the West Bank, Jenin, there was an invasion of Jenin over the past couple days. The Israelis withdrew, but they abducted three people. They kidnapped three people in the process. There was also a complex ambush with a Qassam video of a complex ambush in Jenin. So again, the kind of intensity of fighting that we've seen in Gaza is we're ramping up towards that in the West Bank. And, um, it's a unified struggle and it's going to proceed in that way, and it seems to me this is increasingly becoming all or nothing in every way. The West Bank tied to Gaza, the different support fronts tied together, the Israelis trying to commit genocide everywhere, the Americans supporting all of it, applauding all of it, 58 standing ovations in 60 minutes, etc. So it's just growing and growing and becoming more and more intense with no end in sight. There was also fighting in Tubas in the West Bank. So that's the Gaza front, the America front, the tunnels, the West Bank. Speaking of the West Bank, there's a really interesting communication from Hamas in the West Bank. They made some, they made a communication following up on the Chinese meeting, the meeting of the resistance and the agreement that they signed, all the different factions, all the different Palestinian factions. And it was a communication from Zahir Jabarin to Al Jazeera. And a couple of things really struck me about this communique. One thing he said was the West Bank, he talks about the Intifada of 1987, of 2000, the Tunnel Intifada, and all the wars and stages that our Palestinian people have gone through under occupation. He says the West Bank is the soft belly of this occupation. Our Palestinian people, especially Qassam and all the resistance brigades, are united behind the resistance. All opinion polls in the West Bank say that we are behind the resistance and this option. Then he says something really important in terms of factional unity. He says this unjust occupation does not distinguish between Palestinians. The occupation kills the Palestinian child because he is Palestinian, kills the young man and woman, uproots the tree, demolishes the house because it is Palestinian. You are not killed because of your political affiliation, whether you are from Hamas, Fatah, or the Popular Front, or the Democratic Front, or Islamic Jihad. You are killed because you are a young man or woman. Anything Palestinian is destroyed. And Netanyahu's speech affirmed this perfectly, and all of the American SEALs that applauded him. So this is all just this is all just confirmed, factual statement, but it's also phrased in a very moving way. In terms of other factual statements in this communique, he says there's coordination between all the resistance factions on the ground. Most of the groups have cooperation. The phenomenon of resistance is the greatest safety valve and the greatest rock on which this occupation will be shattered. He calls on everyone to resist. And then he says, I call on our brothers, our families, and our people to unity of stance, even politically, and the agreement in China must be translated into the establishment of a national unity government responsible for all the Palestinian people in the West Bank and Gaza, responsible for confronting this occupation with all means and methods. The Palestinian people have an absolute right to a state, a flag, a passport, borders like any other people. We will not accept being less than any other nation. We will fight and continue the journey of struggle until we achieve freedom, dignity, and liberation of prisoners. Threat of using aircraft in the West Bank does not scare us. The West Bank did not surrender, will not surrender. No people under the people will triumph over these criminals. He links it to Algeria, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, triumphed over occupying countries which were larger, greater, and stronger than the occupation, the Zionist occupation in numbers and might. We have not and will not raise the white flag to these criminals, and we will not be less than these peoples. So again, we are in a totally different rhetorical space than the day after debates about how Hamas is not going to be part of the government, how Netanyahu will not allow a Fatastan or a Hamastan, how the UAE is going to come, how they're going to, the resistance is talking about Algeria, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. They're talking about resistance until the occupation is over. So it's just a total disconnect. There's no Oslo process. There's no two-state peace process that they're going to go back to. This is, we're just past that point now. So he concludes with a statement to the enemy. He says, no matter how many planes you bring and the destruction you cause, we will defeat you. Our strength lies in our faith and belief that we're the rightful owner of this land and you are intruders. The age of the smallest olive tree in our land is older than your imaginary state. This nightmare will end, and we will remove this occupation from our land. Mercy and healing to our martyrs, healing to our wounded. Our prisoners will soon be liberated, and our suffering will end. So, yeah, it was a pretty amazing communication, I thought, from this leader in the West Bank, Zahir Jabarin. Okay, let's keep going. Iraq, Syria, missiles hit the US base at Ain al-Assad. There are also strikes on the Konoko gas field. That's a stolen gas field that the Americans stole from Syria. So they're occupying Syrian oil and gas fields. You probably know that. But strikes on this target have not been happening for many months, and they've resumed. So this is the Iraqi resistance resuming, ramping up their attacks on American assets in Iraq and Syria. There had been some kind of negotiation. They have been trying to give the Iraqi government some space to negotiate the withdrawal of the Americans. The Americans are not withdrawing. And this is also, what can I say? This is also the recognition of what American Western diplomacy is now. And it's a vindication of the resistance perspective. Nasrallah and Hamas people, they have this perspective that you don't, Shazli said it, I guess, in the 70s, this Egyptian commander, that you don't do diplomacy when you don't have a military option. You can get Western occupiers to withdraw without conditions by resistance. You cannot get them to withdraw without the threat and the reality of resistance. So it's just another case. It's a microcosm within this overall war, where the Iraqi resistance gave the Americans some time to withdraw. The Americans said, we're going to withdraw, just stop hitting us, and separate your attacks on us from your attacks on Israel, etc. And the Iraqis did it, and the Americans just took that, gratefully accepted that breathing room, and continued to arm and support the genocide. So it didn't get the Iraqis anything, and the Iraqis are now back to attacking the Americans too. You probably also have seen, maybe, that Hezbollah published a special episode. It's not episode 3 of their Hoopoe Bird Hudhud drone footage. Instead, they published a special episode, 8 minutes, of a specific airfield, military air base in Israel. Footage they took on July 23rd and published the day after. You can watch it. I'd recommend you watch it on Free Palestine TV. Translated subtitles for you. They did that. And it's a major Air Force base. And remember that when Hezbollah has published these 2 Hudhud, Hoopoe Bird video episodes in the past, the targets that they published have been getting hit. So it's not just a threat. It's not just a demonstration. It's also some kind of public communication of the target bank, some kind of way of conveying targets to perhaps other resistance factions, or maybe even themselves, so that those targets then become available targets for Hezbollah to hit. And so with that, I think we can come to the conclusion of tonight's sit rep, coming back to Yemen, because Syed Abdul Malik Badr ad-Din al-Houthi, who I call Malik Houthi for short, the leader of Ansarallah in Yemen, he spoke again today. And among the things that he said that the resistance, he gave a figure that the Palestinian resistance destroyed 500 Israeli tanks. You heard about the tank shortage over multiple sit reps. that Israel is suffering and has admitted to 500 tanks. I actually counted more. I think it's more like 1,000 that have been hit, but maybe the damage on many of those, maybe the damage on half of those is relatively minor. Malik Houthi said 500 tanks destroyed. So I don't know. Maybe he exaggerates, maybe not. He also repeated the Israeli figure of 9,200 plus wounded, badly wounded, like not coming back to the battlefield wounded, that Nasrallah used. And he, like Nasrallah, said the figure might be much higher. But the thing that everybody's paying attention to that he did say was that after Hodeidah, the Israelis attacked Hodeidah, and he said that's going to make no difference to us and to our stance. But he also said that the response was coming. So he said the response to the attack on Hodeidah is inevitably coming. So that is pretty strong and pretty clear. And they don't bluff. So we can expect another attack somewhere on Israel in the Israeli depth coming from Yemen. And Yemen doesn't have air defense, but I wouldn't discount the possibility of surprises in terms of should Israel decide to send another squadron of F-35s to go and bomb some target in Yemen, or ask the Americans to do so, or whatever it is. There was a field report of another fighter jet forced to retreat because of missile defense in Lebanon. So, yeah, things are going. I I didn't, like I said, I started off talking about Netanyahu's speech, and I didn't really get into it because fundamentally I want to repeat what I've been saying on these sit reps all these months, which is it's not a speech from Netanyahu. It's not a ceasefire call from Kamala Harris. It's not a change of heart by an American president. It's not even in the wildest fluke, which I also am not a fool. I know it's not a high probability event, but even if Jill Stein were to win the American presidency, that would not be where this conflict is going to be settled. This is going to be settled on the battlefield. So just, which is why we do this, so that we can give you information about where it's actually being decided, this issue. So I will stop there. Please like and subscribe. I will see you in the next. And yeah, hang in there.